And we are live.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Legislative Review Committee. Today is Thursday, February 6th, and we're meeting in City Hall. We are about to get started with our agenda for today. So we will start with the approval of the minutes from our last meeting on Thursday, December 5th. I'm going to make a motion to approve them.
I'll second that.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay, we've done that. And is there any public input on items of the item on our agenda today? Okay, great. So we will move on to the first and only commission identified item of interest that we'll be discussing today, which is a process for creating new tax allocation districts or amending existing TADs. And we are going to pass this over to staff to move forward with, and I believe it is Sarah George, or what is your official title, Sarah?
Chief of Staff.
Chief of Staff in the manager's office, who will be introducing us and running this part of the meeting.
Yeah, so welcome. Thanks for having us again. I'm going to talk to y'all. This is our third meeting on this charge. So Mayor Gertz signed to us on May 7th, a charge to develop a process for creating new tax allocation districts or amending existing TADs. So because we have some new committee members who are not present and some members that have been here but may not have been at some of the meetings on this topic.
This is my first one on the topic.
Well, we're excited to have you. So one note about this charge, because we had some discussion on it in the last meeting. So this charge is really not just the process that's legally prescribed related to creation or amending a TAD, but also like what does that internal process look like when there is interest from the commission or from a developer or residents related to when we may need to decide whether or not the amendment may be needed. So I just want to call that to your attention. This is our third meeting. So on hand, we have from our lovely Economic Development Department, we have Ilka McConnell. She is our director. And then we also have Daniel Young, who is now our coordinator related to the TADs. So they're going to be sharing a presentation with y'all. We've asked staff to kind of give a little bit brief context related to TADs generally. Welcome. And then they're going to dive into, at the last meeting, we kind of talked around next steps on this topic would be to ask staff to prepare a draft, a recommended process for initiating that creation of the or amendment of a TAD. And then we also wanted to learn more about what would happen related to that funding if we do tend to amend that. So I'm going to turn it over to Ilka and Daniel.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming, and congratulations to our chief of staff on ongoing birthday when he's up this past year.
Oh, yeah. You did, yeah.
So just to recap, the purpose and part of this committee is to develop a process for, well, two processes. One for creating a new tax allocation district or TAD, and the second is to amend existing tax allocation districts. We have 6 TADs in our community. All 6 TADs were started at the same time. They were created effectively December 31st of 2020. So this committee specifically, Mayor Gertz assigned it back on May 7th. We met twice. We met November 7th and then again December 5th. So this is our first meeting for 2025. There is a little bit of a recap for those of you who are just joining us. There's basically 3 phases or 3 oversights of the TADs. So we're going to start with TADs are a redevelopment tool. They're all over the country. Most of the country calls them tax increment financing or TIFs. So we have TADs, and they came to Georgia back in 1985 under the Georgia redevelopment powers law. And they really weren't popular until Atlanta had some success with them back in 2006. Under that law, it gives us some criteria for how TADs are created, what allows us to do TADs. Light is one of the key words, aging infrastructure, inadequate infrastructure, things like that. And to formally create a TAD according to that law, the Georgia Department of Revenue has to certify the tax base. To go on to the next step, and I'll touch on this a little bit more, and this is really just a recap, but to go on to the next step, When we approved TADs and brought them here to Athens-Clarke County by voter referendum in 2011, we did in our ordinance, chapter 128, there's 5 sections for how we're going to manage TAD advisory, or tax, TAD districts with, resident advisory committees. Those resident advisory committees, in the ordinance, we determined that there's going to be a separate advisory committee, all appointed by the mayor, for each of the districts. And then lastly, we're gonna have a staff process. And those are our procedures and rules that are in-house. So those are the ones that are most amenable to any change or malleable to any change and adjustments that we'd like to do. When we determined the districts and the committees, we looked at 4 areas that we wanted to focus on, priority areas, and that included the mayor and commission. Coming back to the development powers, there is a requirement that there is a development agency, and we have selected our governing body as the redevelopment agency. That redevelopment agency then decided those 4 goal areas, and they include housing opportunities, which we're applying affordable housing to, economic development opportunities, business partnerships, youth development, and Clarke County School Districts. And lastly is public infrastructure. And so, let's see, percent to be allocated. I'm gonna go on to the next one.
I have a quick question. The youth development DCSD, is that only for the mall or do they all?
That was developed as one of our 4 areas for all of them.
Okay.
But yes, you're right. The Clarke County School District agreed to participate in them all.
And a project doesn't have to meet all 4 funding areas. They could just choose one and really focus tightly on that one if they
Right.
wanted to, or 2, or however many they wanted to.
This is a really great try.
Daniel, the 4 areas you just mentioned,
Yes, your priority areas, yes.
hold up,
They're not listed.
that should be listed.
Yeah, it's in the minutes. That's the only.
It's in the minutes, but if
Yeah.
we're gonna do a PowerPoint, it should be here.
For future sharing,
Got
so under here, the 4 TAD funding priorities are the 4 bullets you just,
Affordable housing, public infrastructure, economic development, youth development,
and infrastructure.
public infrastructure, yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And hopefully you're going to become familiar with those priorities because each of our advisory committees is going to assign percentages of TAD funds, TAD revenue to those priorities for your review and acceptance. If we can move on to the next slide. This is just TADs in their very basics. So once we identify an area, as I said, it qualifies by that redevelopment powers law of 1985. We are going to determine the parcels. We are really going to define the area very, very strictly and firmly. At that point, we're going to go to the Georgia Department of Revenue. They're going to certify the tax base, and that's going to be the bottom of our triangle number 1. Yeah, that's the annual tax base for that area that we determined. What we understand is property taxes, and we're strictly talking about property taxes, they will go up over time. And so everything above that threshold that was certified by the Department of Revenue, again, on December 31st of that year, everything above, for whatever period of time we've determined the TAD to be, whether that's 20 to 25, 30 years, everything above that will be set aside specifically for reinvestment in that TAD area. So we have 6 TADs, we have 6 pots of money, very singularly defined. Those 6 pots aren't for the general area. It has to be within the TAD parcels that we've identified.
So the term for 5 of the 6 TADs currently is 20 years. And then for actually for all 6 TADs, but for the mall project specifically for the parcels involved in the mall TAD, it was updated to 29 years as part of the community benefits agreement for the mall redevelopment.
I have another question. This anesthesia got me going. I just had surgery. I'm all wired up, all wired. Under the affordable housing, is it too late to be specific about what what affordable housing is? Are we talking about the 80% AMI to something? Can we put what that would look like? I mean, I don't know whether it needs to go back for a vote or we can make a recommendation, but we get too hung up in Congress. I know what I mean, even when I say low to moderate income. So, I mean, you could even do, but we need to have a
Formula or?
a statement, so when somebody looks at this, I don't want anybody saying, what is affordable housing?
So for the mall as part of the community benefits agreement, it was 60% of AMI was the threshold. And Daniel, do you remember in the redevelopment plan, was it designated in there as 80%?
In the mall,
Well, for all four of the tabs as the four funding priorities.
we have 80%.
Yeah, 80% was set for, initially, when you established the four categories, you established it at 80% of AMI. And then during the negotiations and community conversations for the mall project, specifically in that legal document with the developer. I was trying to remember if it was the mayor and commission or it was the mark. I believe the
It's the
mark,
mark.
within the discussion of the mark, it was determined that for the mall project, it would be 60% of AMI. And for the
Okay.
viewing public AMI is annual median income as defined by the federal government, Housing and Urban Development, HUD. That number is determined by a region that's outlined by HUD. So for Athens, it is a bit higher because it not only includes Athens-Clarke County, but also Oconee County, and I think parts of Jackson County. So the number of AMI is a little higher.
Is that mandatory then?
If we're using AMI as defined by HUD, which is sort of,
That's my point. Do we have to use the AMI that's defined by HUD, or can we create our own AMI?
Well, AMI is AMI, but the percent of, so if we want to say 80% of AMI, and what we're doing right now is if y'all look at the online survey for the West Broad Hawthorne area, please, you'll see that one of the options, we discussed 60% of AMI when we talk about affordable housing.
Which is.
And I wanna,
Yes.
I'm gonna recognize, Commissioner Johnson here in a second, but I do want to clarify that, the mayor, I did check in with the mayor after the last meeting, just recently about the scope, and right now, we're focusing on the scope on expanding or, creating new boundaries for these. He did say if there are other subjects that we want to bring forth to him to discuss more, as we've done before with some other topics, we could also bring them forth. So if there's any other TAD topics that we need to address, or we as a community, a committee would like to suggest to the mayor that we return to, we could do that as well.
I don't know if that satisfies my thought, because if we're just talking about the scope, we do need, whether we want to change it or not change it or expand it, we do need these facts, even though they're just us, so.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm not
Okay,
saying
well,
we don't
let's
need
be
to say
clear.
that. I'm not saying
don't
that.
need, I just needed my question answered, okay?
Thank you, Commissioner.
When's the proper time? Go ahead, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was curious, I attended the last mall TAD advisory meeting, and a question was asked by someone in the audience about how many affordable houses were going to be set aside, and they stated 10%. And then I think they asked about a price point, and they said, well, anyone making $60,000 should be able to afford that. And at that time, he balked. He was like, that's not low income. And so the banker who was also at the meeting stated that it's because we combine our, we are combined with Oconee County. I found that to be terrible, and I didn't know that we did that. And if we do that, and we've always done that, that's something new that I've learned, but I just think it's disingenuous to call something low income, and then you say it starts at 60,000, like you have to earn 60,000 to qualify for a low income home. And I don't know when when we've ever done that before with other projects, and why this If that's,
I-
if it
I-
if it is new.
I don't know that AMI, you might be able to address that
It's set
with
by,
that.
by HUD, unfortunately,
But
at
do
the
we
federal
have to
level. so
follow that? That's,
No.
For the TADs.
I don't believe that we do. That was
That's-
a
that's
choice
my question.
that we
If-
determined, that y'all determine locally what those, you know, there's the things that a TAD can, that TAD funds can be used that are eligible is broader than the 4 areas that y'all set as the priorities for Athens.
So we could solely just use our low income numbers, just Athens, not combine that with Oconee County. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yes,
It's up
the
to
thing I
us.
guess that I would just urge consideration of is if you're gonna set a number, just sort of thinking how that works over time, how you would anchor it.
Well, Oconee
Because
County
if-
is the richest county in Georgia. And to,
No,
and then,
Yes, I totally hear and yes, the issue, you're totally correct.
Mhm.
And I would understand also that you might not want to tie it to the HUD thing, but I guess the only consideration I'm asking is whatever y'all determine that you would like to do, just think about how, if you're just gonna if you would just set a number, how that might change over time, and just making sure there's a mechanism that
It
you
makes
could
sense.
update the number or
It makes
make
sense.
sure that it remains relevant as
and
time
so
goes,
there
right?
is an opportunity to review this over a period of time if we develop a formula, but for starting out right now, if we wanted to say the AMI for the TAD for Athens-Clarke County could be 60%. I'm just throwing out a number, or 80, whatever. We could do that, not tied to the HUD circle.
I think then you wouldn't use the term AMI, you would come up with, annual median household income for Athens-Clarke County.
I just would like for y'all to work
Instead
on
of
that.
the MSA.
That's a HUD term, I guess.
It's a HUD term.
Yeah.
So as long as we're using that HUD term, it's tied to federal HUD and how they define.
ACP.
Yeah.
But if we sort of diverge from that.
And I know, and I didn't mean to be as abrupt with Carol, but my point is, the mayor has given us a very narrow scope to work with, but we cannot make a good decision if we don't have these integral parts. I'm not trying to get off track. I'm just saying, the HUD and AMI, it makes a big difference on what our recommendations are going to be moving forward. That's all I'm trying to
Yeah,
say.
and I just wanted to, and John, I think John had a question that was related to that about how can we put together concerns that we have that we
When's the
also want to address? And I think one of the things we could do is create a parking lot and out of ideas. So, and what was the phrase that we used back where we didn't have the colon with those 4 things? The values, the community value, the TAD values or something.
TAD funding priorities.
Yeah, what
Harold,
was,
it's up
funding
here.
priorities?
Harold's on the screen.
Okay, yeah, the funding priorities. So we could put that in there, and what we could do is we can, as we go along in here and we finish the scope of this, we can also be putting other things in this to come back to discuss whether or not we want to suggest to the mayor that these are also topics that we need to explore again or come back to the local ordinance.
If I may, one thing I think would be really helpful is to also have the context as far as affordable housing and what you might want to anchor it at. Also with HCD, because we've had conversations with HCD. The amount of TAD funds in each district it's just not a large amount because the districts have been identified because they have challenges to development, right? Either that's infrastructure or blight or deterioration. So the number that's sitting there for each of the TADs it can't really do anything on its own, right? You would need to leverage it from other things. So just making sure that whatever you're leveraging from HCD also has a similar sort of outline of what you're looking for so that they can work together and you don't have 2 separate sets of.
Well, I still say you can do the parking lot, you can come back to that. But if we're gonna develop a process, and that's what we are assigned to do, we cannot develop a process without knowing the integral parts. Now, if we're just gonna go through this PowerPoint, then let's take a vote on whatever that is. but we cannot do anything, without information, and I'm not doing that this year. So if the mayor is okay with receiving our recommendations and our suggestions,
Mhm.
I'm okay, but it all ties to me. You're almost telling me or us that we just got to sign off on this the way it is. That's what it sounds like.
I hear what you're saying, but, what I said was that we could come back to these and actually make recommendations as we go through this process. I haven't delved into it, and when we're creating a new TAD, maybe some of these things will come up. But what I'm saying is that we can make a list of things that we want to explore further and address further and say, you gave us this narrow scope, but we want to expand the scope. So we have that, we can do that. We have that capability of doing that as a committee.
So forgive me, I've actually seen this process, this PowerPoint. So you're saying then, you guys have not seen this before?
Well, you and me have seen it, but we haven't had a discussion with, it was you and me and Jesse who were here in the last meeting. So
And
three of them-
isn't this similar to what you also did in, at, the East Side? Is this similar?
well, at the next slide, I think it differs because it's talks
Okay.
about.
Well, like I said, I'm just not for us, I'm just not for that, okay?
The first few slides are recaps, just so the viewing audience can get reoriented, and then, we had a couple of folks that were not in the last meeting, so just so that everybody can,
Okay.
yeah,
I've seen.
yeah, Commissioner Johnson.
And that's all I'm.
Yeah.
So we spend a lot of time. We just spend too much time and don't get nothing done.
Yes, so we're just trying to orient as just a brief summary, and then we're gonna go into the actual recommendation, as requested by the committee in the last meeting,
Okay,
on how we could look at this process to
Okay.
amend or create a tab from our end.
okay. So I'm not being difficult. I just need to make sure that we are not getting stuck in these potholes that we've been
Exactly.
stopped in,
Right.
stopped in before,
Agree.
okay? All right, we all friends?
Mhm.
Oh.
Uh-huh.
Well,
Can I make one?
Yes.
So we're looking at how to create other TADs or expand them. I agree. I think and I don't want to get off track, but we do need a time to discuss the regulations and the TAD stuff, because the first meeting we talked about, we haven't had, the mall was the first development we've had in the TAD, correct? And we've had this since 2011?
No, 2020,
No.
4 years.
4 years, okay. So it's still too new to know if it's effective or not. Is that correct?
I would argue, I would say that's probably, yeah.
And we've got issues with the mall right now.
Yeah.
Because they can't get funding because the restraints that we put in the community benefits agreement are too restrictive, where it's too expensive for him to develop the property. So I would think we need to get that fixed before we look at creating new ones. We don't know if these are effective yet.
So you want to add the CBA agreements to this parking lot that we returned?
Yeah, I think we need to clarify, and I'm glad Brad's here now, because he's,
yeah.
but he's, from the planning side, and he understands when, it doesn't have to do with any tab, but if we put too many restrictions on a developer, too many sidewalks, too many trees, whatever, that starts getting into the cost to develop it. And so developers have they have a margin that they need to make. They're not doing this to do it, they're doing it to make money. And so the more stuff you add, the more expensive the product is going to get. And so if it's too expensive for a developer to put this in a TAD, they might as well just go develop it themselves without putting it in a TAD. So we need to make sure it's attractive for the developer to do it. Is that?
And my point to piggyback on is we have not had, I don't even know how we say we want to create more, because he said we don't have no track record yet. And I don't even think most of the commissioners, and I know the public does not know, that the mall is having issues because.
Oh, they do now, which is.
There, because of the community benefit, you know, we've never discussed even as LRC, some of the hiccups that we're in. That's what I'm saying. So I don't know if the mayor's, request, because we don't have enough information. That's all I'm saying.
If I'm history wise, I think, I mean, I don't have a, you know, I don't have a big connection.
You don't
to
have a dad
pets.
in this game?
I don't have a tad. Actually, I don't have a tad in the game. I don't have a tad in the game, and tads are not my, you know, interest area. But of course, we had the mayor brought forth, I believe it was last summer,
Yeah.
the idea, or spring, the idea of expanding or creating a new TAD. I don't remember. the
Expanded
details.
Beechwood.
And
Yeah.
I believe what we
Correct.
said back to him was, we have to have you can't just, like, we need to have a general process for doing this. You can't just bring this forward.
Right.
So I think that's
So that's
why
where
it
we
is
are.
here
That's
for
why
us.
it was assigned. Yeah.
And, okay, and then, all right, so if that's why it was assigned here we go again. When Caitlin was here and it came up, she did not advise because we would lose some money or something if we tried to expand it at our retreat. And so here we go again. That's what we need to be talking about. What happens if we expand? What happens if we stay? Or what happens if we open up? That's what we need to be talking about. I'm sorry about the overview because this does not get us to the conversation and the place that the mayor, what are the pros and cons?
The next slide.
Thomas, we've
because
got it
that's
in the
like-
Well,
slide.
let's get to the next
Yeah.
one.
I mean, most
No,
of
you're
it
doing
is
great.
the other stuffs. And
The
even the
information-
next one is like, we're actually, that's it.
Okay,
I mean,
So those top 2 points are, this is law. The things that are beyond our control, we have to abide by. So what defines a tag such as blight, stress, deteriorating, majority of the building is 40+ years old. And the total tags, right now, for us, all 6 of them, if we add any, basically the total tags cannot exceed 10% of our tax digest.
How did the Classic City qualify for a TAD with that criteria?
It's the
It's
geographical area.
It's-
It's the geographical area.
Yeah, it's not just limited to only the Classic Center. There are other properties involved.
and I'll add to that too. The other properties were not part of the original
Was-
recommended tag. It was just the downtown, area.
It failed the first time.
And so
Then they added the additional area.
Basic-
Correct.
Can we just have one person
yeah,
talk at a time,
let's
please?
use our standard, you know,
Okay.
procedure, you know, and
Decided-
I'll recognize people. No, just in terms of the process that we've used.
Okay,
I'm not always good at it, but I will, who wants to speak next? I will recognize you.
I'm
Alita?
just saying that the downtown, TAD, the 2 TADs that were originally recommended, was the downtown and Newton Bridge.
Correct.
Those were the only 2. After some discussions, the other ones was added. The East Athens was added on last. They did not start out with the downtown. They were added, I guess, to get some movement going. So my point, and I think to Commissioner Johnson's point, how did the downtown by itself, based on this criteria, was the only one recommended at the beginning?
I wasn't on the commission.
Yeah, I don't have the history.
So that is what I think. How did Newton Bridge and downtown were the only 2 that were recommended? So that's the question.
That's a real question I'd like to answer to as well.
Perhaps we could get that answer and on there, because to understand the creation and the past.
The history of it.
I think that there's probably agenda items and previous work sessions and stuff, if we could share those up, and if they're too big, maybe they could go on the FTP site
Yes,
and
yeah.
as a tag, because these same inquiries and refreshers and learning is gonna happen when this rolls out of committee
Right.
to the full
Agreed.
group.
Yeah.
They're also gonna need refreshing and like yours, if you weren't here for this,
No,
then
Yeah.
majority were not
we
here for
weren't here
this.
for this. This
Yeah,
is right
correct, yeah.
before. I was paying a little attention because I was gonna be at the next meeting. But that was the end of the discussion. And of course, I had the same thing when we were talking about what's the place where GMX is? Beechwood, because when I read this, I was like, that's not blighted. Why would we add that? So let me recognize Commissioner Johnson.
I've had this since November 2020, and I read it again for like a third time. And Commissioner Thornton is correct. The Plastic Center was one of the first to be on the list, and these are the qualifiers: blighted or distressed, deteriorating area, or area with inadequate infrastructure. Yes, it did not pass because individuals in the community, they advocated and they were outraged by this criteria, and they were also equally confused as we are. So that background history would be nice to know, and we don't want to make this mistake again. That's all I want to say.
Any other questions? Can we?
Well,
Yeah.
it sounds like is infrastructure under that first topic?
Yes, so,
The blighted district, because Commissioner Johnson just listed, but infrastructure wasn't on there, but it's one of ours priorities. But it's not,
The way it says
The
outlines
distressed
required
and
is
deteriorating could
five.
go under there.
wait a minute, I can't hear her, what?
So the redevelopment powers law at the state level, which is official code of Georgia 36-44,
Yeah.
outlines the requirements for creating a TAD, and it has definitions for each one of those. What is blight? What is distress look about? What does deteriorating infrastructure look like? And then the redevelopment plans outline how each area, what items,
Okay, so deteriorating is the infrastructure one.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
or non-existent, another use for TAD, if
Mhm.
there's not infrastructure there. If there's no sewer line, that's definitely a detriment.
Right, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So that's under the top one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so each one of those redevelopment plans sort of outlines, it has data, it has maps, there's narrative that outlines how each one of those 6 TADs qualifies using the official code of Georgia's
Okay.
definitions for what is required if a TAD is going to be created.
Okay, moving on, back to
So ultimately,
Daniel.
we're trying to spur development, and the whole thing is that a developer could come in, except there's an extra hurdle. That hurdle could be anything from geography or inadequate infrastructure, something that's gonna make the project otherwise prohibitive to them. That's where the TAD funding is one avenue that we could apply it towards. And so we're recommending that any project-specific TADs, and I'll talk about that next, come from those property owners to prevent any issues. We don't want somebody telling us what to do with the other side of town. If we move on, there are basically 2 types of TAD projects. Area specific, which is all 6 bars. We looked at a group of parcels, they were all contiguous. They fell within our, what the law allowed us to do. And they were less than 10% total of the tax digest. And so
What is that percentage? Do you happen to have it?
7 point something, right?
That was the freeze point at December 31st, 2020.
it was 7, I think it was 6.6%.
Back then or now, do you know?
I think back then, I think that's something we developed.
So then we still have to monitor it, because if it goes up, well, there's a whole nother reason I don't have anymore.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
We left cushion deliberately so that
Yeah.
there would be.
Okay, so we started, so that was the starting percentage, and then it's monitored per year to make sure
We don't.
what?
Well-
We stay under 10?
It
That's
doesn't
not,
matter after the creation, it's just when it's created.
Perfect.
Or if a new one is to be added in, then you're sort of monitoring the system.
Okay, so the 6 points, okay, so that was, I think we had, and Commissioner Thornton might have said the person's name, and I was wondering who you were talking about, but that was when we had our relearning at some point that was helping us understand the process.
It's probably
The math of starting over and the math of adding and so on and so forth. Okay, thank you for the refresher.
one thing we haven't tried is a project-specific TAD, but there's some great examples. Atlantic Station in Atlanta, is a fantastic example of one that's spurred serious development. Another one is driving in towards Atlanta. Once you enter Gwinnett County and you see Topgolf on the other side of the road, that is a project-specific tab. They want to do something.
Topgolf.
Topgolf.
It's called the
Yeah.
Exchange. It's,
Yeah,
um,
right there, across the
highway
baseball
from the-
stadium.
And a lot of the development over there is mixed use. A lot of that development comes from the project specific. And the issues with developing over there were two things. The ground was excessively rocky, and then getting the public infrastructure under the highway were otherwise cost prohibitive. So that's how that came to be.
I have a clarification question on this with the area specific versus the project specific. And this may be complicated in my head because of the mall project. So when we're talking about area specific, we've defined these areas boundaries. The project specific, this is just theoretically now, if someone came to us and said, hey, I want to develop this in X area which is distressed, whatever, and I'll go through this process, and it's not one of those 6 areas, would that be a project specific, Tad?
Yes.
Okay, so then just before you go into it, so then the mall was a project specific TAD in an area specific TAD area. That's what always confused me a little
It's
bit.
actually not truly under the way it would be defined. So
Not truly a what,
So
project
it's
specific?
not truly a project. It appears to be, but it's actually not. So I'm gonna totally make this up. There is no discussion of this at all. Say someone just says, I wanna build a giant trampoline factory in the area that is, in our green belt. Listen, viewing public, this is not a project. I promise, it's not a project. It's an example. They wanna build a giant trampoline factory in the middle of our, green belt.
Social media, right?
You know, and some of the green belt, let's say, does not have well-developed sewer or well-developed water because it's the green belt, right? And so a developer would say, I wanna build my trampoline park. Now, this is not a real project viewing public. And then we would go through the process of looking at it. Does it qualify for the things under the official code of Georgia? Have to go through, look at the data, look at the numbers, and figure out if it fits any of those categories which are eligible for a TAD, and write a redevelopment plan for the parcels that would be encompassed for that specific project. So the mall, the redevelopment plan had already been written. It's really a project within an area TAD. So I know
Yeah,
it sounds
yeah.
like just words, but in a way it's different because
Because
the
the-
project specific.
The
would have its
redevelopment
own-
thing, because if the person, for the trampoline park came in, they'd have to, according to what I read, they'd have to create their own redevelopment plan. That would be part of the process, right? And of course, you'd still have to stay under that 10% with a little cushion. So if we were at maxed out, we'd say, sorry, we don't have any room for you.
Well, and as the redevelopment agency, the mayor and commission would have to review and approve that
Oh,
redevelopment
of
plan and
course.
say,
Yeah.
yes, this is eligible and it meets the criteria.
Questions?
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes, Commissioner.
And this might be way off what we're talking about, but I would recommend us not adding any more area tabs, because we're at 6.6%. That gives us room for project-based tabs. Does that make sense?
But they still have to be in that percentage,
No, we only have,
right?
we only have, what is it? What's the,
Well, it was 6.6% when the redevelopment plans were drafted, so
Right.
prior to the creation date 4 years ago. No idea what that
so
percent.
it's higher now, probably.
Yeah, we'd have to have Kurt done.
Well, just say we're at 7%. That only gives us 3% left
Yeah,
for
Potential.
potential tabs.
Right.
If we take all that up with areas, then we don't have any room for project-based. Let's let the let's save that 3% for project-based.
We're noting that in here that might be a very good, point to bring in as a recommendation moving forward. So let's note that for our minutes.
And so a project-specific TED is introduced by, we're gonna say, the property owner. They have the idea.
Mhm.
Instead of a fully fleshed out redevelopment plan, we're recommending that they come in with a feasibility study, maybe studies that demonstrate that they can maximize the return on investment with the project that they're proposing. So we expect some legwork will be done as they come to us originally. And they're gonna, we're recommending that economic development then work with them and collect fees to then build the redevelopment plan, do the school impact study, and all of that legwork and consultation even beforehand, so that we know that we're working with something that's feasible. So that's sort of a start. Way back when we mentioned that TADs are typically, especially area-specific TADs, are like, this is 20 years, this is 25 years. Project-specific have a similar lifespan, but they also have the potential to wrap up a lot earlier. So if we're talking about it's a shopping center, if we're talking about the Exchange, something like that. If the project ends sooner, that TAD can sunset a lot faster. Now that's the potential, or they could go duration more like an area specific. So there's a little bit of changes. There's a lot of law that it applies to TADs no matter what, how it's approached.
So when it sunsets, that frees up whatever percentage that is of the tax changes, is that
Yeah,
correct?
that returns any funds remaining, we have to pay off any debts remaining. And then anything collected from that point on, we'll just go back to the appropriate general funds. And I say appropriate general funds because our general fund, if the school board is involved, their general fund.
So we're locked into this for 20 years already.
Unless you determine that you want to terminate them. But you can also terminate them early. Like, for example, Gainesville had 2 TADs in their, kind of in their greater downtown area, and one they've recently sunset.
So as we are, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right, go for it,
Try.
you know.
So. Um. So as we are trying to stick with the, mayor's, directive, do we have, I think you mentioned some really good tasks that were, that are functioning very well in the Atlanta area. But now, do we have information on tabs that have not worked out well? And had to either be canceled or stalled? Do we have equal information, the ones that are doing good and the ones that were not doing so good?
Okay.
I can probably compile a list, and that would be nationwide, because we've certainly determined best practices. And some of those do cite issues that other municipalities have had, so I can look for that.
There are some TADs in Gwinnett County that have been set up that have just not really been used much. So there's a TAD around the Jimmy Carter area. I'm just remembering that because I worked for Gwinnett County before I came here. There's a TAD in and around Gwinnett Place Mall, around there. So sometimes the TAD is set up, but it's maybe not actively used. It's a tool that's there.
A small list, unless it's a big list, that would be helpful in trying to follow the mayor's directive.
Commissioner Johnson?
I wanted to also, related to what you all are talking about, ask Daniel Young to mention what we discussed or what you discussed at the mall advisory, the TAD meeting, where, and I don't remember all the details, but I remember 5 years, and I think that's the only TAD that the school partners with. And if a certain amount of money was not put into the TAD at year 5, then something happens. I just don't remember what that something is, but would you mind repeating that scenario so we can actually know about that and discuss?
Please don't quote me on what exactly the $1 million is, but yes, the joint development agreement between ACC Gov and the school board suggests that if there's not, and this is the part I'm not sure about, if there's not $1 million in development within 5 years of initiation of that agreement, which is September of 2027, it will dissolve the joint development agreement.
We can follow up to Chair Myers with the actual wording so that you can read the word for word what was in the agreement.
But just to note, that's to the mark, right? That group, that combined body between park commission, park school board. So it would not dissolve the TAD.
But
It's
the,
just the body associated with it.
Joint agreement.
Because at that point, the school district is no longer consenting to participate in that. So I don't know what that means process-wise. I would defer to the attorneys and for outside counsel and what that would look like if we did hit that stage, but I just wanted to confirm and clarify.
and if the school system pulled out at that point of the TAD, then any project that came in would only be able to potentially access the increment from local government taxes and not local government taxes plus school system taxes, so.
So that's kind of their kill switch that they put in there. Is that the right term? Is it something else now? Termination switch? That's,
I'm not an attorney. A good technical term, but I know it to be.
not PC.
So can a developer pull out without any penalties? Can a developer pull out of a TAD without any penalties?
We'll have to
Well-
look at the CBA for the mall and what is written into it.
We've already favored the idea of pay-go, which is we will be reimbursing developers. And that is a
Oh, okay.
method of trying to keep them engaged.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're not out any money.
Yeah,
That's the good thing with doing pay-go.
okay.
Like one question on the Gwinnett made me think, since they have experience of this and they have project specific TADs, do they have a process for creating a new project specific TAD or area specific TAD? Since it's a Georgia entity that's been going for a while, is there anything we could look at? I know you all will think about it, but can we look to see if they have a process or any other Georgia municipality has a process?
Yes, actually, so Gwinnett County, Gainesville, there's Rome and Atlanta. There's several areas all across the state that we've looked at, and some of them do specify what a project-specific TAD application would look like. Yeah, they have that in there. I believe Gwinnett does. I'll check that.
Please share anything applicable that would help us in our going through. Okay, so shall we move on?
Okay, so yes, we can read through this one, and go to the next one. This is basically economic development will take lead and do all the homework and generate a report for feasibility and details and talk about any legal counsel. We'll look at the tax increment and all that stuff and have that to the manager's office. If you move on, Sarah.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. We'll give it to the manager's office to make any, to do their review and make any recommendations. This would be the first time that it then comes to the mayor and commission. This is under that redevelopment powers law, the first time. It's coming to you as a proposal, as the redevelopment agency. So that's going to be your first role as you look at the proposal for your TAD. And again, that's either project or area specific.
And this is, I think this is, like probably 4 years ago when I was listening to this, I was like, where's this redevelopment agency come from, the redevelopment plan? But these are specific requirements that are in the Georgia state law that have to be done to move forward with the TAD.
Yes. A few times in this presentation, we have to have the laws in there, so 36, 44, 7. Now, I want to say something. So this is, I watch you all on YouTube, so.
I'm sorry.
Bless your heart.
Nicely. What we're asking you to do is give us your approval or recommendations on doing a redevelopment plan. We're not asking, you to direct us to get all the information that would be a redevelopment plan before we actually do a redevelopment plan. This is the permission to do so because redevelopment plans are massive. We're talking about, working with budget and strategy, about parcels, identifying those, the Georgia Department of Revenue. We're looking at, defining it, and how it meets the state law. So there's a lot of research, the school impact study, because we're doing that as a tool to let the school board know that we would like them to join us. So there's a lot of work and fees in the actual redevelopment plan. So when it comes to you the first time, we're basically just asking for your approval to go ahead and initiate that.
So that second bullet, would it be correct from what you just said that that could be retitled steps required by economic development to create redevelopment plan? Because 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are the steps, right?
Yeah.
Is
Yes.
that right? Okay,
You got it.
thank you.
And just a quick note, even though the school system has only approved to participate in the mall TAD, we do a school impact analysis for any TAD or proposed TAD.
Great. Commissioner Thornton?
So the gist of it is giving staff permission to do a redevelopment plan with all the research. Not saying that we're going to adopt a TAD,
Correct.
but we're just doing the study to come back to. Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, my vote is no. Because I would like some of those questions answered before I give that type of, the stuff y'all said was not part of this conversation. Is I would like that I want to know the cities where they've done good and the cities that they have not done good. I want to know, I know somebody was taking notes, right?
Yeah.
I would like to know that before I say, hey, go spend your time, our money for a redevelopment plan.
So just to clarify,
Mhm.
this is staff's recommendation on a draft process to understand if the commission as a body consents to interest in exploring, amending, or creation of a future tab. So this is purely the recommendation from staff related to a draft process as defined in the scope. We're not asking you to tell us right now to go amend a tab or to create.
No, but my point is, I don't want it to leave
Right.
with that explanation without some of the questions that I have. Maybe
Yeah.
nobody else has them, but
Yeah, we need.
it's best for us to ask them in this
Right.
room
Correct, yeah.
than at a meeting. That's what I'm saying.
Exactly.
I don't want it to leave here unless some of these questions are addressed. I'm not saying I don't support the research and the work. But if we have questions here, we're gonna have them when we get to the meeting.
About TADs in general.
Okay.
Yes. Commissioner Johnson?
Are some of these details under economic development, 1 through 5, part of the work product that you do in the office, just part of the work responsibility in general?
No,
But this is a major undertaking that I think is take away from the current work that they do. I don't know if it's,
So that's, I mean, that kind of ties in the question I was thinking too. I mean, in this process above, once accepted, we have to instruct the preparation of the formal redevelopment plan. So if a developer came in here with this trampoline factory and we thought this was crazy, we're not going to send our economic development. We'd say no at this point, and you guys wouldn't have to do this. So there has to be some kind of analysis coming to us. I guess that's on the previous page or something.
Yes.
That would make it worth it to you all. And did you guys do the redevelopment
well,
plans
that's
for
what
Oh.
the
I was about
original
to say,
6
the
months?
first 6,
I did them.
you
Oh.
wrote them? But thought-
No, I mean, Dan McCray did. I was liaison to Dan McCray.
Dan Craig
Yeah.
did them?
Mhm, yes. So when we first did this, we didn't have any tabs, right?
Right.
So there was not anyone designated on staff to do this work, but because this is an economic development tool, at the time, the office was in major transition. The director
I
had
think I've
just.
been here 2 months.
Mhm.
Well, but not even,
Well, no,
the
that
first
was
time around, I
yeah.
wasn't even here, yeah.
The first time the director had resigned. And so had a very small office. I think it was only 2 other people. And so to assist, the manager's office kind of took on the lead of working with outside counsel, because it's primarily outside counsel and just kind of provided the information to them. But it is a large undertaking.
It is.
And so once we had those identified and they were adopted, we did have to designate staff because there's ongoing work, as y'all can see, which is why we appreciate having Daniel in that role related to this. I don't know what your official title is, Daniel, you have to tell me, but the coordination for all of the TADs, because it is a lot of work. It's a lot of work both in administration of the existing TADs, but to Ilka's point, it is also a large undertaking when it comes to actually having to go through the process of creating that redevelopment plan to determine if we can prove that those areas are blighted or deteriorating to where it would warrant a redevelopment plan and TAD. So that's why staff, and part of this, the question that y'all had in the last meeting, and I say y'all loosely because I know several of you were not there, but generally speaking, the question was, well, how do we as a body understand when we do want to move forward with it? Like there has to be some beginning step before staff does all this work and we haven't talked to each other. And so this is just the recommendation that staff has created. But to Commissioner Meyer's point, there would have to be a little bit of investigation ahead of time, which is what you're seeing on this first slide that Daniel had just covered. So if for an area specific TAD, if y'all amongst yourselves had decided, hey, I'm interested in a new area TAD, or Commissioner Culpepper wanted a new area TAD in his district, what does that process look like? So we could initiate from the mayor commission level, getting it on the agenda to give a directive to the manager's office to then have staff do a little bit of investigation to give you some more information. Or if it's a project specific TAD and the property owner's coming forward, what does that process look like? And so staff's looking at doing a little bit of research on that, but in consulting with legal counsel, but it really would be ultimately up to the consensus of the commission. Does this warrant staff's time in investigating it further and preparing that redevelopment plan? Because it does cost both money in terms of outside counsel. It does provide cost money in terms of the individual who's helping us with that school impact analysis, which is very technical in nature, and it is a lot of staff time.
So is there somebody right now somewhere that is interested in expanding a TAD? Is this why we're around this table?
But back to what we said before, where the thing with Beechwood came up, then that's all I know from that meeting. I have nothing more than what happened at that meeting.
I'm still under the feeling I don't even think about a new TAD until we have either more information or have already created our own information. And the only TADs that are moving right now is the mall, and the other night we voted on Newton Bridge. I don't think that is, so then it goes back to, I guess that's why I came on to the meeting. I just drove down Hawthorne and I see the TAD yard signs up for question. I've sent it to you. And my point is, forgive me for being, thinking everything is suspect. But it really looks like it's intentional for me to see a survey sign on a what do you call it, the yard sign coming down Hawthorne. That's where the question came before. So are we, let's just, if this is about Hawthorne and that Alps Road area, let's just say that, and then if that's the way you want to move, that's fine. But let us not go through. I don't have a TAD survey in my district on yard signs.
I don't know what that is. Can you share what we're talking about?
I sent it to.
It's for the West Broad / Hawthorne TAD.
That's my point.
We're in the focus on getting their input for their community identified priority list. We're doing this one at a time for each of the 6 TADs.
I've never seen a sign in, any of the other areas. That's all I'm saying. This is a little
Oh.
different.
We had them in East Athens for the East Athens
Okay.
input meetings, and we
I sent it to, I've sent it
on
to
Newton
everybody.
Bridge for the Newton Bridge ones and Lexington for the Lexington ones.
I've never seen it.
About for the mall.
Yeah, we bought yard signs and put them out, but in the TAD, like in that area.
And I mean, like, this is not the TAD, but the firehouse stuff over in the east side, I mean,
I've seen yard signs before. I have never
Okay.
seen a tag one.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
I've seen yard. We did that with North Avenue,
yeah.
the yard sign. So I'm not saying that. I just think that even if it's not anything, spooky, it just kind of rambles in my head. And I was coming from the hospital when I seen it, and I had my son drop me off here because I wanted to ask about it. So if you're saying this is just the input for the current tag,
Yes.
I'm okay with that. I just do not want us jumping out, asking people, what do you think about expansion in this meeting?
It's complicated enough talking about it among ourselves.
It's very complicated.
Okay, we're on page 8.
Yeah, we're only.
Commissioner Thornton mentioned that the TAD
Try it.
number 1 mall project was underway, is it?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Commissioner Thornton mentioned that the mall TAD was underway, and I'm surprised to know that. The question is it?
Underway.
You meant the
In what
process of it.
Just the process.
3 years.
Yeah, but they're at a standstill.
They're further ahead.
Okay.
They're further ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you
Yes, I
attended
just
some
want
of the community input sessions, so,
Yeah.
so how it came about with the community identified priority lists was because of the community benefits agreement, the mall had 26 different versions, was it 26 of the CBA? That was,
Yes.
very time consuming, it took a very long time, and it took a lot of back and forth during the process, because we didn't already have those priorities other than the 4 identified. So what we determined and learned from the mall process was it would be better to know what the community wants
Priorities
before we get
first,
into a
yes.
CBA. So that's what we've been doing, is going through all the TADs right now, gathering input, having the community and the advisory committees create these community identified priority lists that then are presented to y'all. So that way, if a developer is coming into the area and planning a project, we can say here's the list that the advisory committee has compiled with input from the community and acceptance by the mayor and commission of the list in a public meeting. So
Okay.
that's sort of the process we're in. The West Broad we're doing community input right now, and then North Avenue would be the final one of the 6 to go through and have their community input.
Okay.
Let me, totally apologize because I keep reading this. Develop a process for creating a new tax allocation or amending existing tax. That's our goal.
Yeah.
So we don't even have an option saying, no, we don't want to create or amend.
Wait a minute, I have a motion. I was gonna wait till the presentation was over.
Okay,
Should I throw it out there now?
throw it.
The motion I'm contemplating is to pass without action, that we don't want any new TADs and we don't want to add to the existing TADs. Is that something you're thinking about?
That's what I was thinking.
But I was gonna wait till we learned everything, because again, wasting people's time or trying to assign a
Yeah.
big block here. I had a commissioner say, well, let me know what y'all talk about on how to get rid of a TAD. So it could be that that's the discussion we want to have. But anyway, so that's a motion. I'm contemplating once the presentation's done.
Okay, let's go to the presentation. You said, well, what the hell?
Should we just get on with it? Where would you rather the motion?
All of this work.
So barreling through this, there is a requirement to get public input. So once we go ahead and start to formalize a redevelopment plan, we're going to get public input at least one session, if not more. And then we're going to come back to you a second time. Now we're coming back to you not as a redevelopment agency, but as the legislative body for acceptance of the redevelopment plan. If we go to the next one, you have 3 options, and I only have 2 on here. So the first option really is if you don't want this new TAD, or you don't want this project-specific TAD, you've got too many trampoline factories already, you just simply deny it. Or you can approve it as is, or you can amend and approve it with your defined options. And of course, in these processes, you can always come back to us with more questions or anything before we get to this final vote to approve. If for some reason you were to reject it and return it to us to continue to redefine it or refine it rather, the public input is still a requirement on whatever final product we're then sending to you as that legislative body. So once a TAD is approved, again, December 31st, the forthcoming December 31st of each year is the official start of it. Once again, economic development will forward everything to the Department of Revenue to certify that tax base. The mayor will need to appoint a TAD advisory committee if we don't already have one in place. And finance is going to set those TAD increment amounts for each parcel and for the area as a whole.
I do have a comment, because I thought it was gonna be in here, which might be part of my motion. I thought it was a great part that I read in the minutes where you guys were comparing other TAD groups. I think the Gainesville one that you had, that it was one group. And they were, steeped in the training on it, and all the TADs were discussed. And then I think you guys talked about then how you would add the public that made it TAD specific after there was a consistent group with them. And so my motion or our discussion later after our motion might be that we want to see if we can make a more efficient use of the TAD process.
Parking lot. Yeah.
Anyway, but
One note on that.
that was part of the presentation I missed, and I really liked that idea.
And yes, staff, I think, is fully in agreement in recommending that. One note, Government Operations Committee was actually looking at boards, authorities, and commissions, and that is something that they have discussed. So it may be, I'm not telling you.
We could
to do
talk-
your motion.
We could try,
It may be, we
cross
could also talk.
committee,
Okay.
pollinated.
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
I will talk to Commissioner Davenport on that.
So
Isn't there a bunch of other pages in here?
Yeah.
Do
we
you-
still have the amendment. We
Yeah,
haven't talked
so,
about amending the TAD.
yeah.
I'll
Or
carry
can-
through it.
You
How
can,
fast
you
can I
can
go?
take, yeah.
This is
take-
10. This is page
Yeah,
10.
just.
This is
take the-
visual for
Yeah.
anybody who's more visual for a different kind of dynamic
Thank
set
you.
of slides.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
So amending a TAD. There's several amendments we can make to a TAD. As you all know, East Downtown. One amendment was to divide the funds from 70% and 30%. Maybe doing that joint development authority. So there are amendments. This is specifically to amending the geographic boundaries of a TAD. And the reason being is the law requires us to revisit so many of those lengthy processes just as creating a TAD. So the redevelopment plan, if we elect to do a school impact study. So there's all sorts of things that we have to re-engage. The biggest thing is when we redo a TAD, the geographic boundaries of a TAD rather, it actually resets the increment. So if we,
All the TAD increments.
just the one TAD we are
Okay,
amending,
Okay,
yes. So the
Okay,
one
thank
TAD
you.
we're amending, it resets that increment and basically we wipe out any, remember the threshold?
Mhm.
where
It
everything
adjusts the
above
threshold.
is set aside? Yeah, that threshold is going to change. So if we've already seen development and just done a great, well, now we've got this much higher threshold.
But the money still comes to the general budget. We don't lose the money. It just.
We don't lose the money, but it doesn't go to, that's what Caitlin said at the meeting. That's what Caitlin said, that we had to set the increment. And actually, it gets wiped out, doesn't it?
It's not,
I mean, it's not wiped out of the property taxes, but we have to start again to get that percentage point.
Any money that we've already put in the TAD is still in the TAD
Okay.
account. It's,
technically those funds could roll to the general fund, but if you wanted to, you could designate them in any way that you normally designate general fund funds.
But that's not what she
So that's,
said.
that's
different.
for the community, like the community that's been.
Okay, let's, Commissioner Johnson?
Yeah,
I
that's
just
what
want to
I-
make sure I just want to make sure we hear. I didn't
Oh,
hear
I'm
because
so
there were
sorry.
more people talking.
I thought that any, revenue generated in the TAD zone it stays in the TAD zone for the greater good
Yeah.
of the people.
It does.
Yes, when
But I
we're
heard
doing a
general
geographic
fund.
boundary amendment, if we wanted to make any other amendments at that time,
Mhm.
then we would have to actively do that, or rather, your body would have to actively redo that.
So what would normally happen if we don't make no recommendation? What would just normally happen with those TAD dollars if we don't specifically say we want it to go, or do we have to say that?
I believe that they will stay with the TAD. Everything
Okay.
else stays, the creation date stays the same, the
Okay.
life of the TAD stays the same, everything else
Yeah.
remains in place.
Okay.
We've just have to do a lot of new studies, which is.
Commissioner Johnson?
I just have a quick follow-up. So what I hear you saying is that the revenue generated in the TAD area stays in the TAD. However, we have the option to make a recommendation to take that money out of that TAD area and put it into the general fund.
No, I made
Is that
a
not-
point,
yeah.
I think I confused you by mentioning
Oh,
that.
okay.
I'm saying that if you have a TAD right now, right, all the money above whatever that ink line was in 2020 goes into the TAD account. If you
Right.
change this TAD, it's gonna change that line. And
It'll
so
move
it'll move the baseline.
Yeah, okay.
And so maybe if it changes $2 million, I don't know, like now we're starting again, so any
Yeah, I got it
increment,
now.
so that's what
You
it,
got,
so,
yeah, I was confused.
yeah,
Gotcha.
So that's the negative of the amendment process,
Yeah.
TAD, is if you had a project in a TAD area that generated a lot of new property tax revenue for the TAD to allow that area to get sidewalks and new lights and things. And then 5 years from now, after Project A, which is generating a lot of that money, you decide to amend the boundaries of that district, it resets, and all that money for that 20-year period that continues to go in based on Project A goes away. It stops at that point because now you've reset your amount and you go from there. So that's why generally amending a boundary of one, you really don't want to do.
And that's what Caitlin said.
right.
Yep.
Right, that's it. Commissioner
So
Culver?
I just want to make sure, if we're looking at language to amend, that it needs to be in there, that money stays in that area. If it is amended, the money that has been collected up until that point, it needs to be in our, whatever reasons, that money stays in that neighborhood, whatever that
I
area.
don't know if you can.
You can't.
You can't, that's what the
Can't
TAD.
move it out.
That's
If you
what
want
the
to amend one, there better be a good reason to amend it, because anything that has occurred from its original inception to that point,
That money goes to the general fund?
No.
No, that's what I'm trying to say. Let's make sure that money stays in that area.
I think it has to. I think legally it has to.
Okay, that's want to make sure there's no,
Carol gave a hypothetical
Okay.
that's turned us into a.
sorry.
But what Brad said is what Caitlin said, because I'm just pulling pieces together, and that's what I
Yeah,
remember.
which is what I was
Taking a
saying.
spin,
for
taking a
version.
spin.
Okay,
That's all right. It was confusing.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
It is the start of the inception date. Is this the inception date based on contract, like signatures, or is it based on when the project actually starts?
it was when,
20.
for the example of the West Broad Street or the mall area TAD,
All of them.
there was an assessment that was set at the time that was created.
Well, when the assessment was.
And so any new investment into that area that increases the tax base of the area, that money stays in that area for the life of the TAD, as long as it operates. If you amend the boundary, you reset that amount and start over at that point and move up.
So for all the TADs, that was set 2021 January. Yeah,
Thank you.
so even for the mall, even though the mall CDA happened later, the baseline was set in 2021.
Other Department of Revenue.
So staff is recommending that, to get a recommendation or a request rather for an amended TAD area, that comes in a formal application from the property owner. And of course, then economic development would take lead on confirming that it meets the laws, and getting that basic information. Just like we proposed when creating a TAD, there's 2 phases. We're gonna bring the introductory report to our manager's office, who then bring it to you as the redevelopment agency. And then with your blessing, we would go and do the actual redevelopment plan. same fees as creating a TAD, for their TAD project rather, to that developer, to do all that, and then we come to you a second time with the redevelopment plan, and request the change of the TAD. And as was mentioned, yes, there's a much higher justification threshold, to explain why we're going to give up all of that revenue that we have otherwise been setting aside for many years. Everything else is a little bit repetitive from creating a TAD. So I am happy to wrap it there.
I have a motion. I would make a motion that we, pass this action, what's this called, an action item? Agenda item without action. No new TADs, no amending existing TADs. We can share with our, that's my motion.
Second.
And second, and part of that is from the learning process is that we could have a project-specific TAD entice us. That would, and we have room for, to add that, but we're really, I like the way that it was just frozen at that percentage so that, we would have that advantage, but the whole can of worms to me that gets opened up by changing that frozen revenue.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understand was it just pass this out completely without action?
Yep.
Or I
Yep.
thought, but you just said, mentioned we could have a project specific,
Well, if that comes through, then somebody.
but we don't have a process. I mean, that's part, like.
Well, then she's shutting down this request.
No, I'm just saying that, I don't think we should change it at this point. We have a process to change it.
Oh, I mean, I just,
Right,
because
area
included in
specific
here was a
plan, is that
process
correct?
to create a project
Right,
specific.
area.
I thought there was a suggestion in here about creating a new TAD, a new project specific.
Okay, then I might have confused it, but I was motivated because if the project-specific TAD came through, because we don't have any project-specific.
And
TAD
it
right
does
now.
not, and the mayor's directive does not specify project specific.
Right, but I'm saying that,
Oh, you're saying that would be.
I'm saying that would be that we could, one option, following what Commissioner Wright said, would say we're agreeing here now that we don't want to create any more area specific, but we will use the recommendation presented to us for a process for creating a project specific.
Well, you need to ask the mayor, is that okay
No,
with him?
yeah, I think I was complicating it by giving some of my methodology. But I think that we should leave what we have as is, which was the motion to pass without action. No new TADs at this time. No adding to the existing TAD, which matches, or no amending existing TADs, which matches the charge.
Oh, do we have a second for that? Okay,
Yes, one.
there, yes.
So if a company comes to
The
us,
trampoline back.
Yeah,
To
traffic
do
down the
that.
greenway.
we don't have a process. Is that?
We don't have any, well, with the exception of Newton Bridge, which has some pretty big issues with sewer and infrastructure for industry, right? Because, so generally speaking, we really don't have a lot of employment zoned properties within the 6 TADs. So it's not a great tool for adding our targeted sectors, which are the
Okay,
high benefited jobs, right?
Okay.
There's a few on Newton Bridge going up until on the right side. But we're lacking some sewer there and there's a lot of water in there. So those are employment zone, but they're not very attractive for industry because there's a lot of water on the parcels and sewer stops partway up Newton Bridge. So the short answer is we don't really have a lot of employment zone properties and definitely not ones that are big enough for a trampoline
Okay,
factory.
that was about. I didn't want to see myself.
Because I don't have a trampoline park.
Room in the whole county for a project?
Well, for
trampolines?
A project, maybe for a project specific TAD.
Well, that's what he
Yes.
was asking about.
For a
Well, I
project.
just don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot if a huge
Yeah.
company
So
comes.
one could come in, let's say in Athena Industrial Park, but we would have to be able to justify that it met
It's a blind area.
the criteria that are outlined.
The typically undeveloped is not.
Okay, Commissioner,
Okay, that-
Yeah, my blind is here because I'm blind.
We have.
Yeah. So,
Can the mayor be more, could you check with the mayor and see if he could be more specific about a project specific. If he does that, we can,
Discuss that in specific.
if
But
he
it-
would check it.
But
back.
did we vote? Did we get a vote?
No, we didn't vote. I was clarifying
I just
what
had
the
one
vote
question.
was.
Got answered, so I'm
Okay.
fine with it.
Yeah. Okay, well,
One quick question. Is it possible to have just a happy medium, not necessarily approve a formal plan to develop a plan, but use these communities that you spoke of, Gwinnett, Gainesville, Rome, or Atlantic Station, or there was another one I wrote down, Topgolf, just as a model to at least put together an outline. So if it is approved down the line, you at least have the outline, you can fill it in, and then you're not really starting from scratch, but you have some idea.
okay, I'm
Just
gonna,
a con-
that's a
question.
comment.
It's a comment, it's not necessarily going toward the business.
Okay, and we're gonna vote on this, moving it out. I'm for a record of saying I don't want to move that because I'd like to go ahead and create that process for a project specific one. And just get moving on that so we could have something next time. I'm fine with not having area ones, but I'd like to have that project modeled on maybe some of these other places, but have that, so if
So you're gonna do
anyone
two
came-
votes?
no, so I'm not,
She's-
I'm just explaining I'm
okay.
fine on this because I don't want to move the whole thing out.
Okay.
Yeah, so we are voting on Commissioner Wright's motion, seconded by Commissioner Thornton, and we'll start with Commissioner Wright.
Oh, we're gonna do. a
Oh,
vote.
we're just doing it that way because I just started.
Yeah, I agree with my motion.
Okay,
I'm fine, yeah.
I'm good.
yes,
Yes.
no.
So that you can ask the mayor for
If he
another
wants to
charge.
resend it back.
It goes up.
If he
What's-
wants project
Well,
specific.
What do we have
I
on the
would say
docket?
before we do that, let's look at
No problem.
the creation, and I really want to understand, we've got a project that the mall, it's not working, so let's learn from that and figure why it's not.
Yeah,
And look at all that stuff versus the area, how to create another.
Yeah.
I think we need to look at
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Because y'all mentioned, in the first time we discussed this,
We're still in the.
we had you had problems getting a quorum because there was too many different meetings, is that right? So we need to look at streamlining that process.
Yeah, and if there's recommendations that can come back another time, is if they bring back.
it's
from
fine.
that what GOC does, they could kick some of the TAD stuff back to us if it's involving, because we're running out of people to volunteer and
Yeah.
actively be engaged, to be
Okay.
clear. I am.
Let's see what else is on here. We want to confirm, the next, meeting will be, as always, well, most of the time.
It's normally the first Thursday, so it'd be March 6th.
Okay, that is after the meeting. Okay, on March 6th at 1 o'clock. Does that work? Or we're gonna have a quorum on March 6th?
It's gonna be a lot of basketball.
I
games,
can't
but
be here, I'm out of town.
It's, also
Mark.
spring break, education.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm
that
gone
does,
March.
that doesn't impact me, but if it impacts you, you'll be,
17,
But
are you,
New Zealand.
okay, so do we have, let's just, this is all we need right now is do we have a quorum
That's when
here? Okay.
I won't be here.
Yes,
March, no, March, I'm here, I'm thinking of April, I'm here. Sorry.
April.
It's a long day, long week.
Okay,
March
so that we might prepare for that meeting.
yes,
Oh, no,
Okay.
shit.
Okay,
What would be?
We're done
I
with
think
this.
we're done with this.
We're
We're
not
done.
Okay, got it.
You're not the item. Yeah, that's right. Okay,
Listen, I have thoroughly enjoyed these meetings and I think Daniel and I have had really,
Oh, yeah.
done really good work.
Yeah, this information has
So
been
thank you.
wonderful,
Okay.
thank you, Daniel.
Before
It
we-
helps us understand it.
before we
How
adjourn,
complex it is. It's part of it.
before we adjourn, Commissioner, Johnson has a question for economic development.
I was wondering if you could put together a historical timeline of events. I've looked through all the documents and I have two full notebooks of every agreement, everything. But I would like more context,
For TADS?
for the mall development project.
Okay.
There are many people who ask me questions and without knowing, I mean, it looks like it changes often. The agreements and whatnot. I'm not sure what's going on, and I don't want to speculate. But people ask me every event I have, what's going on. People are counting on it. People are relying on it. And it's starting to, people are starting to look disenchanted or feel disenchanted without any update.
Yeah.
That's my responsibility. And I read and I just can't translate it into a short conversation. And so if it's possible to put together a timeline of just highlights of this is what happened, this is when it was initiated, this is the disagreement, this is the negotiation, this is how it changed, this is what they accepted, just short.
Oh, I don't know if we'll be able to, we'll do our best. We will do our best.
Whatever you can do would be great, because like I said, I cannot
Yeah.
put it together in a short, succinct, 2 to 3 minute response.
Yeah,
And I would like to, because people ask me almost 3 or 4 times a week.
yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Shall we have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, and we are officially adjourned.